This is a show. Show is called Philosophy for Freedom and Flourishing, and it's all about philosophy. So it might seem like an odd place for me to be interviewing some friends who happen to run a mortgage company, of all things. But this is not your average mortgage company, and it's run with a very deep philosophic vision by entrepreneurs who happen to really understand the importance of ideas and their impact on culture. So they're just getting started, but I really do believe that these guys are going to have a significant impact on the culture, and I'm excited to see that. So thank you guys so much for coming on the show today. It's Tim Chermak and Mitchell Broderick from John Galt Mortgage Company. Thanks, guys.
Thank you,
Thanks.
John.
Good to be here.
So I'd love it if we could start by talking about the central ideas behind this company. And one of the central ideas, because I know there are many, but one of them that sticks out to me is the idea of the harmony of interests between rational people. And I know you guys are fond of saying, when we win, you win. So I was hoping you could riff on that a little bit and explain what you mean by that.
Yeah, so I'll just jump in and start here and say that I'm kind of like an economic business history nerd. So in my spare time, well after I was being forced to by, a high school teacher or a college professor or whatever, I enjoy reading books about like history. And when you look back at some of the most successful entrepreneurs in American business history, names pop up like Rockefeller, Carnegie, Vanderbilt way back in the day, Henry Ford. What they did was they built businesses, they built products and services at price points that was a major win for consumers at the time. So even back, if you go to this like Gilded Age, if you want to call it that, to use the preferred a euphemism, right?
My friend Andy Bernstein calls it the inventive period because he wants to take back this period. Go ahead.
Yes, exactly. You look at what Rockefeller did to the price of, essentially a kerosene and light. He brought it down 80% for the average person. So this kind of narrative that's out there of these big evil businessmen that made their wealth and built their riches by like screwing people over, as if capitalism is a zero-sum game where it's like, I win, you lose, right? Turns out that's not at all true. If you even spend 2 minutes doing research on, how these guys built their businesses, even Vanderbilt at the time with steamships. I think a lot of Americans are familiar with, Henry Ford or John Rockefeller, but they haven't heard really of Cornelius Vanderbilt. About 50 years prior to all these guys, he built his wealth in steamships back when that was kind of the main method of transportation. And there were basically government contracts that were doled out to the big steamship operators. I mean, totally crony capitalism, right? Like not in any way a free market.
Not even capitalism, if we define it correctly.
Right. Yeah. It's just mixed kind of government managed economy of, we're going to give our friends, and actually in some instances, I believe in the state of New York, they were like handing out the licenses to like family members who owned the steamship companies. And even if you wanted to go into competition, you weren't allowed to, right? Like you had to have a special government charter to operate a steamship on the rivers. And so Vanderbilt goes in, and his mentality was kind of what like Uber did 10, 15 years ago, of I'm just going to go in and I don't care if opening this company is technically illegal because I don't have all the licenses and I'm not following these like unjust laws, right? I'm going to give consumers such a good deal. I'm going to undercut the competition's pricing by so much that it becomes political suicide to oppose me, because he became known as kind of the people's champion. And he was almost like this populist hero because he brought down the price of steamship travel so much by lowering prices. He really is the one in terms of the modern era who came up with the idea of, a loss leader and selling a fare at cost and making your money back on sales of concessions, things like that. That's kind of how Vanderbilt operated. He was ruthlessly efficient in making sure he could offer the lowest prices possible, so that if you scale that right enough, you can have lower margins, but actually make a ton of money by giving consumers a win-win deal. And his business plan absolutely worked out, in that even though he was technically violating the law. Again, it was an unjust law that he was breaking. He was technically violating the law by doing all of this. Consumers loved him so much because he brought down the prices that like the politicians, if they wanted to, keep their careers intact, couldn't really oppose him. They kind of had to just make some backroom deals and let him keep operating because it was a win for consumers, right? So bring all that back to, modern day. This is really what's inspired us, I think, to launch JGMC, the John Galt Mortgage Company, is we saw an opportunity to take that same kind of idea of giving consumers a really, really good deal and just kind of lowering the margins and passing on savings to the consumers so they win. And if we can attract enough people that want to get their mortgage with us, it's a win-win for us too, because, we do a lot more volume. And so we're kind of taking that same business model and applying it to a mortgage brokerage. And we think it's a win-win.
Now, on your site, you have posted very prominently the saying, finally, a company that doesn't hate American values. Does that tie in with your view of the quote unquote Gilded Age, or what we call the inventive period?
Yeah,
I
Mitch,
think it does. Sorry, go ahead.
I was say, Mitch, I'll turn to you on that one because I know that you're pretty passionate about, standing for values and actually a company that doesn't just bow down whenever a politicians expect you to on any issue.
Yeah, so actually, John Galt Mortgage Company was sort of it was an idea that I think the genesis of it was Tim and I were just talking on the phone one day. And I think we actually had the name before we were actually really serious about making a mortgage company. Because we thought, wouldn't that be a cool name? It sounds like it does sound like a mortgage company. It kind of, we had the idea, I think, right before 2020 happened. And obviously 2020 happened, and, maybe that revealed that, American values were more eroded than I thought, right? Or than all of us thought. And so that was really kind of a punishing year to get through. And certainly since then, there have been some places, people have lockdowns ended. There's a lot of work toward, making schools freer, et cetera. But still, it was kind of a punch in the gut that, these values of personal liberty, personal responsibility, they just don't seem to be, at least if you listen to the mainstream narrative, they just don't seem to be things that people are valuing anymore. And in doing that and looking into it, I start, trying to see, okay, well, how do you overcome, and obviously through peaceful measures, how do you overcome this like tyranny and, psychological warfare and lies that are being pushed on an American people? And through reading the various books, and you kind of look at like what happened in the Soviets, it's like, okay, they really push this idea that you have to basically just create parallel structures in your society. You have to reject the lies and the narrative that's being pushed, and you just have to create parallel economic structures, parallel businesses, a place where you can do business with people who don't hate you, right? And we're certainly not the first company who's going to be, pushing that mantra, and I hope we're certainly not the last. But it's really important that people can say, okay, I have to get a mortgage. I have options of who I can go to. Is there anybody where I can get a great deal, first of all, who will also align with the values that I would like to see perpetuated, once again through American culture? And for us, I know Tim and I are aligned. Like, for us, it's small business owners. Like, we need to promote people becoming entrepreneurial, getting into the, service of value creation for other individuals for, mutual benefit. And we benefit with our business model. Sure, it's not the business model that is technically the most profitable per unit, but I think eventually we both see that we can become very profitable in the long term.
You mentioned entrepreneurship. I know you guys really like to tout self-reliance. Could you speak a little bit more about what you're calling these American values and why you see them as such?
Yeah, the first one for me is self-reliance, right? And that's not because I think people should just take care of themselves. I think self-reliance is important from a psychological perspective. If you are able to take care of yourself, and you're able to grow as a person through that journey of entrepreneurship or other means through entrepreneurship or just creating value for companies inside, that's very, you cannot grow as a person if you're, committed to being stagnant, right? And the personally, I think the government wants people to be stagnant, right? They don't want people who are thinking, who are, happy with the way things are in their life, happy with their station, happy to get, the handouts or the welfare. And in my opinion, I think people are better people when they're striving and reaching for, a point in life where they're thriving. And what thriving means is going to differ per individual. Not everybody is trying to go out and build a gigantic business. But, that's obviously for the individual to decide. So self-reliance is important. Tim, you probably have some to add here.
Yeah, and it's literally in our DNA as Americans to be self-reliant, because if you were born here in the United States of America, your ancestors in one way, or another, had to learn to live off the land and survive, whether it was in, like the Cumberland Gap or the original colonies, or they went west, or maybe your family came here after the Irish potato famine, in the 1800s, or in the, obviously the waves of immigration that came in the early 20th century. You had to be self-reliant, right? Most people came here not speaking language, with no savings whatsoever. You just had to be self-reliant. So in a literal, almost biological sense, self-reliance is in the DNA of Americans, I think more so than almost any other country in the world, because most countries can trace their, lineage back centuries. I mean, generations and generations and generations, and they have like social infrastructure and that scaffolding to fall back on. Americans don't really have that compared to almost any other country on earth. So self-reliance is a really, really important value. But as we dissect this, I want to be clear that we don't just mean to kind of like pontificate and ramble about these, esoteric values like self-reliance. Like, it's not just PR talk, right? It's not just fluff. We actually run the company in a different way because we embrace these values. So as a mortgage brokerage, if you look at what most mortgage companies do, most real estate companies, they want to push whatever policies can make them the most money, even if it violates their values, right? And I think that's an important contribution of Ayn Rand, is that people might build a straw man argument that says, oh, Ayn Rand only cares about profit over everything else. Like, all values are, downstream from profit. But that's not true. If you read the books and you've read Atlas Shrugged, you understand the character motivations, right? Profit absolutely is a lagging indicator. It's a result of creating a value added work in the world, but pursuing profit at the expense of all else is not always the way of living a virtuous life. You don't violate people's rights in order to pursue profit. And so when we think about self-reliance, we think about, okay, does this mean as a mortgage company that we're going to offer, overly generous down payment assistance programs to help people buy a house who couldn't even save a couple $1,000s on their own? Like, is that really in that home buyer's best interest to have
if we valued profit above all else, we probably would not have named ourselves John Galt Mortgage Company and aligned ourselves openly.
Yeah, let's talk about the elephant in the room for a minute, because we haven't really talked about the name at all. So who is John Galt? Where did this idea for the name of your company come from?
Well, it sounds like somebody who could own a mortgage company. And the real crux of it is it's an homage, right? Tim and I have connected and have loved Ayn Rand together since we met first in 2014. That was just one of the commonalities we had, and have grown a friendship beyond that. And I love the homage. He loves the homage to these Randian ideas. It's like, okay, that's going to be, that's sort of a thing that, you know, there are a small percentage of people who will hear John Galt Mortgage Company and they're going to get it. And they're going to say, well, I'm going to have to work with them if I'm buying a house, right? If there's any way I can work with them, I'm going to have to, right? There's also going to be a small percentage of people who are going to hear it and they're going to say, I would never work with that company, right? We're going to decree them, we're going to dox them or whatever, right? Like it's just ridiculous. And that's okay. We don't, you know, we do mortgages for all qualified borrowers who, you know, well, that's about it, right? We do mortgages for all qualified borrowers who want to work with us. But then there's this middle of people who have no idea what the John Galt reference is.
The middle in this instance isn't evenly split like a third, a third, a third.
Well, let's talk to those people right now, because I don't take for granted that people hearing this will necessarily know who John Galt is and what this is an homage to.
Sure.
Well, correct. And so there's this middle who have no idea what John Galt's a reference to. They would just think that some guy named John Galt started a mortgage brokerage, right? And it kind of sounds like, you know, it's, you would buy that, right? This guy named John Galt owns the company. And I make calls all the time to vendors or seeking new vendors, and they just call me John all the time because they think I'm the president. They just think I'm John, right?
Excellent.
I get mail addressed to John now. So that's kind of, you know, that's entertaining because I'm like, okay, I guess I'm John Galt now. We're trying to build a company that if you are in that middle and you don't know anything about Atlas Shrugged, and the John Galt reference is just far beyond you. One, it's a way for us to potentially introduce that to people. It's not something we have to shove down their throat, but it's a way for us to introduce that to people who may have never heard of it. If they go on our website, it may be intriguing, it may turn you off, but if it is intriguing, that's an avenue to plant a seed, right? Because obviously, I think if more people read Ayn Rand's books, whether it's the fiction or the nonfiction, they're very valuable, and it'll make the world a better place. And I speak from a point of it certainly helped my own life reading Atlas Shrugged with my background and The Fountainhead and Anthem and so on. So I don't discount how much reading one book could change the trajectory of someone's life, because I've personally experienced that. So we can open an avenue to people who've never heard of it. Beyond that, it's something where, okay, maybe they don't know it, but they'll go on our website and they'll see some of the values that we talk about on our website. And certainly as we grow, we're going to be doing a lot of outbound marketing that is explicitly pro these ideas, explicitly pro entrepreneurship, pro building businesses to make a profit so that you can thrive and, you know, buy assets as a life philosophy. Buy assets and build your wealth. And I actually have a quote that's not hanging in my office, it's in my living room. And it's that quote from Atlas Shrugged that says, what greater wealth is there than to own your life and to spend it on growing, right? And I think that's kind of the really great thing for me and Tim, is that a mortgage company sounds like a boring business to go into. It's an unsexy business. People are not going to be excited about it. But we can be excited about it because of what it enables us to do in the service, dare I say, of spreading ideas that we're actually both really passionate about.
So for those who haven't put it together yet, who is John Galt and what is this a reference to?
So it's obviously a reference to the book Atlas Shrugged. I've told some of my friends that are more in the, you know, Christian or religious community that if you can think of Jesus as being the hero of the Bible, but he doesn't make his opening appearance until halfway through, it's kind of like that in Atlas Shrugged. John Galt is the hero of the book Atlas Shrugged, and without giving any, you know, any spoilers or anything, we wanted to name the company after someone that we think is, you know, the perfect embodiment of these ideas, of the ideas of Ayn Rand. And so obviously, without giving any more, I would just encourage people to go read the book Atlas Shrugged and it gives Mitch and I the warm fuzzies, knowing that lots of people are gonna say, okay, who is John Galt? Like, why did they name the mortgage company John Galt? Like, what? And then they will Google who is John Galt. And so we are very much looking forward to seeing that spike in Google traffic of people searching the phrase who is John Galt, because they want to find out what this is all about, you know. So it was definitely named after this idea, this character in Ayn Rand's 1957 novel Atlas Shrugged.
And I mean, it's the most gifted book that I've given to people. I don't let people borrow it. I just give it to them. I have multiple friends every year who read Atlas Shrugged for the first time. Some of them really love it. Some of them, you know, will say, hey, I enjoy the ideas, but, you know, they have the same kind of criticisms about her, you know, prose or her writing, which is, you know, that's fine. I disagree with it, but that's fine. But I mean, I think it's at least a good book to read, particularly if you're reading it through the lens of, you know, comparing it to the parallels in our society today, because I don't think a day goes by where I don't see a headline or, you know, a quote that some politician or some businessman has said that I can't say, oh, that's just ripped out of the pages of Atlas Shrugged, which is, you know, going back to my point of people saying, well, Ayn Rand writes unrealistic dialogue. I think that's absurd. That's an absurd statement. That's one of the criticisms I hear the most frequently, because I see the dialogue all the time that she wrote in real life.
Yeah, I think one of the common criticisms that I hear, and you probably hear it as well, is that her characters aren't like real people. And if you go and actually look at what Rand was trying to accomplish, she says very explicitly that she's not trying to mirror real life. Her approach to art was not naturalism, it was romanticism, how things can and ought to be. And I'm wondering, you mentioned, Mitch, that this book had a huge impact on your life. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about that. What were some of the life-serving lessons that you got from reading it that ultimately inspired you to head up a company called John Galt Mortgage Company?
Yeah, well, you know, I'll cut it really short and just say that, you know, I was not, you know, I didn't grow up in the most fortunate, you know, childhood situation. I've had what people would call childhood trauma. We were pretty, you know, we were not well off. There was a winter where we couldn't afford propane. And I lived in Michigan and it was cold winter. So we just didn't have heat that winter. So like we weren't particularly well off. I was the youngest of four. Most of my siblings were out of the house by the time I was in high school. And I was definitely interested in ideas. And I had a teacher my freshman year of high school who, she wasn't even my teacher yet, because I wouldn't have her until sophomore year, but she coached the forensics team, which is like competitive speaking and debate. And I was doing the speaking side. And so she got to know me a little bit. And this teacher was a pretty liberal. She had an Obama bumper sticker on her car. But she was a wonderful teacher, and she was really looking out for what students needed to be better, not pushing some kind of agenda that she had. And she saw some kind of spark, and she had contacted ARI years ago. So she had hundreds of Ayn Rand books as long as she taught them. And she handed me first Anthem and then Atlas Shrugged. And she said, I think you're going to really enjoy these books. And boy, was she right. And it's not something, you know, the joke is, you know, a boy is 16 and reads Atlas Shrugged, or he'll read, you know, Lord of the Rings, and eventually he'll grow out of it, right? And that's not the cliche for me. At age 29, you know, signed the paperwork to create John Galt Mortgage Company, and I haven't been growing out of it yet. Which doesn't mean I'm not growing as a person, because I certainly would say I am. But as far as why did it have such an impact on me? The first thing was in reading the dialogue, I actually felt like I was reading someone I could understand, people who were straightforward with one another, people who, you know, you showed how much you respected a person by how honest you were willing to be with them. And respect and love go hand in hand. You don't respect people, you don't love people if you're not willing to be honest and upfront with them. And boy, did I not understand how much that was lacking in our world, you know, until we got into the real world. So that was the first thing, was just sort of relating to characters from a psychological or personality perspective that I had never seen in a book before, or really met in person before either. I hadn't really, you know, I didn't have a giant network of people either that I was exposed to in my rather dysfunctional family. So that was the first thing. It really lit me on fire and guided a lot of my, you know, beliefs heading into adulthood, you know, post high school. I really kind of forged my own path. It was sort of a, well, they say that people, you know, can't make it without a college degree. And Mitch thought, to hell with that, and never thought about it again, right? So I don't know much more I can say right now.
Yeah, I'll share that when I read it when I was 17, and I'd always really sought after some meaningful central purpose in life. And I thought it was something that you're sort of like born with and you have to discover. And then I read this book where people did seemingly normal jobs, but they approached their work in a way that made it seem morally heroic. And one of the quotes on your website is that business is morally heroic. And I love this. Profit is just the accounting term for leaving the world better than you found it. When did you start to really apply these ideas, and how did they change you in sort of your approach to work and life?
I mean, I think I began applying them immediately. I kind of joke about, you know, my first job was at Taco Bell. And a lot of times, like if you run into a teenager, you know, and they're working the cashier at Taco Bell, they're going to kind of shy away. They hope you don't see them, right? They're embarrassed. I was not that kid. I was way too proud of my job at Taco Bell. And I would just tell myself that quote that, gosh, what is it? I'm going to paraphrase here, but that quote that there's no such thing as a bad job or a poor job. There are a lousy job. There's no such thing as a lousy job. There are lousy people who don't care to do them, right? I loved working at Taco Bell. I gave it my best. I was easily, you know, in the top 3-4 employees that was there, and I did that for 3 years until I got fired. And it was something that I really enjoyed. And then I have applied that same thinking of, you know, I'm going to work. This is the work I have to do. I'm going to learn what I can learn here, and I'm going to apply that to what I'm doing next. And so that also would reflect back on, if you haven't read the book, it won't make sense, but you should. In the beginning, when you're first starting to meet Hank Rearden, and it's telling you the journey of his life to this point as he's walking home from the steel mill after the first pour of Rearden metal. And it's just walking through this, you know, how he just built himself up over and over. And he said he should hang a sign that says Rearden life, right? And so I just kind of always internalized that Rearden life. I'm here to, you know, be in charge of my life and in charge of my destiny. And I don't have to resolve myself to, you know, living in the means in which I was raised, which I'm not going to say my mother did a bad job. It's just hard to be a single mother raising many children. It was hard then. It's probably hard now. It's probably not going to get much easier. So I internalized the ideas immediately. I have always been, you know, friends have told me, you know, you're an intense person, Mitchell, right? And I'm like, that didn't really resonate with me until the last few years, when I kind of realized that a lot of people don't, you know, have the kind of conversations or the kind of straightforward talk that I will bring to the table, where I don't like to beat around the bush, I guess.
A is A.
Yeah.
That's funny. So I Googled your company, and the first search result that you get, of course, is a link to your website, and it says contradictions do not exist. So what's that all about for people unfamiliar?
Yeah, we wanted to in all of our marketing, right? Like we're a for-profit company. We're not like a a B corporation or a non-profit, it's a straight up traditional for-profit company. But we wanted to leave all these Easter eggs, kind of like these hints pointing back to the book Atlas Shrugged, where if you've read the book, you would understand all these references and hints that we're making in our marketing. But if you don't, if you haven't read the book, you'd be like, contradictions don't exist. What is that a reference to? Or what does this have to do with mortgage? There's all these things that would just make you question, what are they even talking about, right? Because we want to point people back to the book. I would love if people Google who is John Galt, and if our company isn't even the top search result, and maybe they end up going to some other website that tells them about Atlas Shrugged or tells them about the philosophy, the ideas of Ayn Rand, that's awesome, right? Like that's a win for us too. Eventually we have retargeting set up. Like they're going to find they're going to find their way back to our website, or they'll find us in social media. But if we can point people to the ideas of Atlas Shrugged and getting that book, and maybe they start by reading Anthem, maybe they start by reading The Fountainhead, or actually me, I personally started reading Ayn Rand's nonfiction before I got into the novels. But that's a win for us too. So like using that phrase, contradictions don't exist, it's a reference to the philosophy of Ayn Rand, and that A is A. If you ever look at some situation that confuses you and something just doesn't make sense, right? Like something just isn't adding up, you have to look at your premises and see if one of your premises isn't true, because contradictions don't exist. So that's just one example of ways we're trying to kind of sprinkle in Ayn Rand's ideas into our marketing, because as the company grows and as we have a budget for doing more marketing, we're hoping that, of course, we attract more home buyers, more people wanting to, get a mortgage with us. But in doing so, we're also illuminating and showcasing the work of Ayn Rand, so that her brand and the number of people that are going out on, on Amazon and buying Atlas Shrugged, or Googling Ayn Rand, or Googling who is John Galt, we hope that increases proportionally as our company grows.
Question for either of you, whoever wants to take it, but how does that approach to advancing your values compare to the typical approach that business people take, if they take one at all?
Well, I think as Mitch said earlier, when you look at the past couple of years of, COVID lockdowns and all that, like look at what is the status quo right now of corporations in America. It's that they will bow down to whatever kind of the left, with like a capital L, right? Like the institutional left, what the cultural left wants businesses to do and corporations to do, they will do. So any sort of like empty rhetoric and virtue signaling that comes out of companies now is very, very left leaning politically. Like you do not see companies taking a stand for, limited government, Second Amendment rights, or low taxation, or we support profits and small business ownership. I mean, all these kind of old school American values that didn't used to be controversial, now all of a sudden they're controversial. Instead, what most companies brag about, and I don't even think they really care about this, it's just an empty PR, an empty PR signal. We have companies bragging about, the amount of diversity hires they've made, or how much they've donated to climate change initiatives and purchased carbon credits, or the social justice initiatives that they have going on, or how much money their charities, give away every year. These companies don't actually care about that stuff, right? They're just doing it because they think it buys them political favor and cultural favor. So when so many businesses in America aren't just left leaning, but like extremely left leaning in their messaging, we thought, it might be a good idea to restore at least a little bit of balance to that, and have a company that's not right leaning, right? So it's not that it's right versus left, but a company that actually stands for just objective values of A is A, like reality is reality. Let's stop pretending that the political spectrum is left versus right, and let's stand for values that hopefully everyone can get behind, which is entrepreneurship, personal liberty, self-reliance, working hard, saving it for a house, owning your house because you know that you can deserve it because you worked and saved up for it, not because it was an entitlement handed to you by some government program. So one thing that we often repeat in our social media ads is owning a house is an achievement. It's not an entitlement, right? So that is the opposite of what most real estate and mortgage companies have in their messaging. Like they're going out of their way to brag about the, home buyer grants and down payment assistance programs of, even if you haven't even saved $1,000, you can buy a house with our special program. And we think that, okay, it's just financial engineering. Maybe we shouldn't let it bother us too much. But I think that attitude actually reveals a sort of cultural decay in America right now, that we just don't think that you should have to pay for things on your own, that there'll always be a political handout or a government program that'll step in whenever life gets hard so that you don't have to face reality, right? So even on something like that, we're trying to run the business in a way that's consistent with the values that we claim to care about. It's not just empty PR rhetoric.
Beyond that, I'll ask you a question. Do you know of any mortgage companies off the top of your head?
Well, my wife is in real estate, so I know a few. William Ravis comes to mind, and they have their own mortgage section.
Sure. There are certainly banks, they're going to be able to originate mortgages, or they'll be the lender and they'll actually fund the loan. We're a mortgage brokerage, so we're not the lender, perhaps one day. But it occurs to us that there are virtually zero mortgage companies that have a brand outside of We Do Mortgages. And so they don't have a marketing or message outside of, here are the programs we have, and here's our daily rates, and we can run those ads to get in front of you and try and just get the transaction out of you, right? There are no mortgage companies that are actually standing for anything other than, we conduct business. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's obviously a perfectly fine way and profitable way to have a business. That's just not appealing to me if I'm going to be spending my life doing this. It's very difficult for me to, maybe it's a psychological, mishap with me, but it's very difficult for me to not input my opinion and values into my life or into the various places of my life. There's not a friend group I have where I don't talk about, politics or philosophy, and I'm not really great at small talk. And Tim knows this. I can't talk about sports for sure. And it was not really ever an option if I was going to do mortgages. Oh, I think we lost Tim for a second. But if I'm going to do mortgages, it was not an option that, okay, well, you're going to have to be silent about what you believe in, because that's going to be good for us to have a company. There was really no option to do anything other than, if we're going to do this kind of a company, then it's going to have to be aligned with who I am as an individual, because I'm spending my life on it. The next 10, 20 years are going to go toward building this company into what I think it can be. And I don't think that there are other mortgage companies that are operating from that kind of a standpoint of actually creating some kind of a brand with a message beyond mortgages.
Yeah. And so as you guys grow, so will the question, who is John Galt? And I'm curious how you plan to answer that question for a hopefully quickly growing customer base.
I think that's a good question, right? I haven't given a ton of thought into how exactly I would answer it as far as like a canned response. And I'm not great with canned responses anyway, which is probably, the antithesis of what people think of a salesperson, and I'm a salesperson. I tend to, I probably ask them some questions. If they ask me, who is John Gul? And then I'll whip out the book, right? Throw the book at them, right?
And throwing the book at them, do you guys have any plans to like distribute copies of the book?
That is, it is in conversation. We would like to. We have to figure out logistically the best way for that to happen. We definitely are planning. It's something that we very much are wanting to do, but we just don't know exactly yet how we're going to make that happen logistically, because they're not small books, as you know. And we're not necessarily a distributor of them either. So there are some hurdles there that we'll have to overcome. But it's something that we definitely would like to do. Otherwise, we'll tell people, maybe you should give this book a read, or any of her books. And Anthem is a great place to start, but it's definitely different than her other books. So
how do you envision the company impacting the culture over the next 5, 10, 20 years?
Well, as far as like the conservative libertarian kind of sphere of people who are generally, Big Tent kind of generally interested in these ideas, we're hoping that we can become a company that's as well known as, say, a Black Rifle Coffee Company, or at least from a marketing perspective, as well known as like a Jeremy's Razors, right? All these companies have sort of captured these types of audiences, and we're hoping that we can do something very similar so that we can build up, a sense of brand loyalty and advocacy. Beyond that, I mean, the great thing about being John Galt Mortgage Company is that all of our ad dollars that we spend and every ad that we create, particularly if it's more creative and not necessarily mortgage centered, which is the aim we want to go down primarily, all of that is outreach into the community to help, educate people, get them interested in ideas, get them sharing the ideas. The potential for how that can impact, that's sort of beyond me. I don't see a limit, because you never know who's going to see one of the videos that you put out, one of the advertisements that you put out, and what it's going to do for them. Will it click something in their head and say, I need to look into this? Oh, and there's, it has to do with this book, and I'm going to read this book. So there's a lot of, I would say, most of the benefit that we could possibly do, most of the benefit that we could possibly do with JGMC is probably going to be unseen. It's, we're not going, unless people reach out and tell us that there was some positive thing about it, we won't know beyond people coming to us to do their mortgage when that time is ready, because most of the people who see our ads are not also going to be in the market for a mortgage at that exact moment. But if we can, build an audience of people who really love us, then over the course of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years, they're probably going to buy a house, and we'll probably be, first or second on the list of who they want to try working with.
So my question was, how do you envision this company impacting the culture over the next 5, 10, 15 years?
Well, first, I would love to have heard what Mitch said, but I'll go without knowing what Mitch said.
Yeah, just
you don't have my answer to go off of. We might say the same thing. I don't know.
That's fine.
So I think for the next 5 years, it's going to be a lot of that, just like in the trenches, entrepreneurial work, getting this thing launched and off the ground, building the infrastructure behind the scenes, hiring people, building training systems and whatnot, because until you get to 50 to 100 employees, it's like everyone's job description is fluid, right? And it's just kind of that entrepreneurial chaos. I see that probably taking 3 to 5 years realistically of just that building. And then I think 5 to 10 years from now, according to plan, is when we'll really probably start to become more of a national brand. And that's the goal, is that 10 years from now, John, to answer your question directly, I would love for us to be doing things like Super Bowl commercials, where we have that level of brand awareness and we're playing the business game at that level, right? So it's not some tiny niche little mortgage shop that no one has heard of, but it's like a household name amongst the demographics that we want to be a household name to, right? So we really want to build something big, something special. We've talked about long-term potentially even opening a chartered bank and offering, a wider array of, financial services above and beyond just, a residential mortgages. So we are really thinking big with this thing because we want to make money, right? And the larger it becomes, ideally we are making more money. And there's not only nothing wrong with that, like we're preaching that that's a good thing, right? Like that's a moral value worth pursuing, is profiting in your life because you create value for other people, you know, and it's a win-win. So we're pursuing that as a value, but also the larger the company becomes, the more we can get these ideas out into the world as well. And that's also fulfilling for Mitch and I and the entire team at JGMC. So we want to do things like, again, as a marketing strategy, it's like, well, what if we sent out a copy of the book Atlas Shrugged to everyone who inquires about, you know, getting pre-approved? They fill out the application, then we send them kind of a thank you gift. That's a copy of Atlas Shrugged, and people will be getting these books in the mail, and they'll be like, what the hell? Like, this mortgage company just sent me this 1,000-page book. Like, what the, you know, what? And they'll probably Google Atlas Shrugged or Google, like, what does this have to do with, because they'll be just confused, right? There'll be some people who get it and they understand, oh, cool, that's awesome. But a lot of people won't. And so hopefully you can track actually on a graph as our company grows that more copies of Atlas Shrugged are out in the world and more people are Googling, you know, ironically, who is John Galt, to find out. And so as the company grows, hopefully interest in the ideas and the philosophy of Ayn Rand grows with it. And that's huge for us, because the reason we started this company and named the company John Galt, to go back to your earlier question, John, is that we kind of zoomed out, like, okay, let's just fast forward 25 years into the future, right? Let's say that we become very wealthy and Mitch and I and the team, you know, are worth tens of millions of dollars a piece, and we've made bank on this company and like achieved our wildest financial dreams. Probably what a lot of us would do is invest a lot of that back into organizations that we care about, that we think are promoting these ideas that were so important in our formative years of shaping our worldview. So, you know, whether that's, you know, Objective Standard, ARI, Foundation for Economic Education, Cato Institute, what, you know, all these like organizations that promote these values and free market economics and things like that. We'd probably invest in those, you know, in those organizations. So we kind of split the world in making money and giving it away. That's what most people do, right? Like, I'm going to make my money over here, and then when the time is right in my life, then I'll focus on the philanthropy of giving it away to organizations or churches or whatever that I care about, right? Charities. We kind of had this idea of like, well, if we really actually believe, like, it's not just lip service, but we actually believe that business makes the world a better place, right? Like, we actually believe that profit is a noble motive. Like, we're not just saying these terms because they make us feel good, but we actually believe that. Couldn't we build a company that inherently, by making more money, kind of checks off more than one box, right? Like, we're killing two birds with one stone, where as the company grows, we're spreading these ideas such that we don't have to be guilted later in life of, oh, I've made a bunch of money, I suppose I better give some away to like do some good with the wealth I've created, because the way that we built it was simultaneously building the world and shaping the world that we wanted to live in. So we're getting the reward as we build the company of seeing hopefully how it impacts people. And we both really look forward to getting emails and letters and having people tell us that, like, hey, I had never heard of Atlas Shrugged, or I had never heard of Ayn Rand until I inquired about getting a mortgage at your company, and I got a mortgage from you, and so much more, right? So hopefully we hear a lot of messages like that, and we can make a bunch of money doing it.
Yeah, wouldn't that be incredible if more business people understood your approach to business? I mean, this is just a really innovative approach. I love it. Can you imagine having a Super Bowl ad with just the words John Galt in it? I mean, how many people would that turn on to what I think are some really life-serving good ideas? I'm going to be buying an investment property probably in the next year or two. And suppose that I'm not already sold on you guys. Anything else you'd like to add why I should use, and perhaps others should use, John Galt Mortgage Company?
Well, absolutely. First off, what state are you going to be buying in?
Probably New Hampshire.
Okay, well, we'll have to look at the New England. I'm sure we'll be licensed there by then.
We'll see.
So we're kind of talking a lot about our big goals, and maybe people should work with us because we're John Galt Mortgage Company, and we've got these Ayn Randian ideas, libertarian, great, America at its greatest ideals that we're trying to perpetuate and shove back into the culture, and that's awesome and everything. And I do think that ought to be reason enough for some people to work with us. But but wait, there's more, right? So we've actually created our business model in such a way that there's even greater benefit to work with us, which is that we actually cap, it goes back to Tim, the opening statement that Tim made. We've intentionally made a business model where we make less money per loan and we turn that back over to the borrower or the client in this case. Sorry, I won't do lender or mortgage guy talk, but and so what that means is that on every loan that's essentially around $250,000, $300,000 or higher, we cap our comp on that. And everything that we were otherwise supposed to be paid, because the way this kind of works on the background is that the lender pays us to originate a mortgage. And, let's say that's, almost 3%. It's like 2.75% of whatever the loan amount is. We cap our compensation, and everything above that we can use to either buy down someone's rate lower than what it otherwise would be, what they otherwise qualified for, or they can use that as cash towards closing as a lender credit. And that tends to be thousands of dollars. Right now, the average that we're helping people either buy down their rate or give as a lender credit is around $5,000 per loan. And there are some that have been certainly higher because they've had higher loan amounts and percentages. The higher the loan amount, the larger the number of percentages. So that's really one of the wonderful things, is that you can support a great business who doesn't hate you and wants to perpetuate the same ideals you want to perpetuate, and we can get you a great deal, or at least a greater deal than what the market otherwise is going to give you without doing a whole lot of work. So that's something that we're really excited about. It means that realtors can benefit by, looking into us and sending us their clients as one of the, references that they send out. And it means that, buyers themselves can really benefit by reaching out to us directly, because there's a good chance that we're going to be able to beat the rate that almost anyone else is giving you, on top of, my kind of obsession with having really incredible customer service. I'm very responsive to all of my clients, and they love me for it. So that's just, it's like, there's no reason to not work with us if we can get you the best rate and we can, perpetuate the same ideals. What more objections could you have?
And I think it's important to point out too, when we talk about getting home buyers a better rate, like every mortgage company is going to say that, right? Like every mortgage company is going to say, oh, we have the best rates. Make sure that you give us an opportunity to give you a quote. But they all essentially have the same business model, and they're just saying that because they hope that you go with them. We actually have a different business model under the hood. As Mitch said, we're charging people essentially a flat fee on commission, where we don't make any more money on a $600,000 loan as we do on like a $250,000 loan. That's not true of any other mortgage company. Other mortgage companies have their commission set up as a percentage, so they make a lot more money on a $600,000 loan than they would on a $250,000 loan. And simply what we're doing is we're applying that difference to buying down the interest rate, so that the actual par rate, the actual interest rate that we quote you when you first apply with us, we can't promise it for compliance reasons and all the government rules around that. But like almost every instance, the interest rate that you get quoted from us is going to be noticeably lower than from other mortgage lenders. John, I don't know if you know Isaac Morehouse.
I do. Not. Yeah, he's been on the show.
Okay, cool. Like he was our very first customer with John Galt Mortgage. And we saved him, I believe, almost $300 a month on his mortgage payment compared to what he would have had if he went with a traditional normal mortgage lender. Like $300 a month. I mean, that's thousands of dollars a year for the next 30 years, because that's not a teaser rate. That's just the flat rate that we quoted him. So as I mentioned at the very beginning, this is a strategy that was, we didn't invent this. This was the strategy pursued by Cornelius Vanderbilt, John Rockefeller, Andrew Carnegie, Henry Ford, and many, many American businesses since then of pursuing volume with slightly smaller margins, just giving consumers a better deal and betting that they'll recognize that value and reward us with their business because we're giving them such a good value compared to the competition. So that's the strategy.
Well, as you guys put it on the site, business is morally heroic, and I love what you guys are doing. I really do think it applies in this case. What you guys are doing is heroic, and especially because you've integrated this with your values so seamlessly. So much applause for that. Thank you guys so much for coming on the show. Where can people find out more if they don't already know?
Well, you can go to, www.johngaltmortgage.com. You can like us on Facebook because we're posting great stuff there all the time. And more so because we're going to begin, once we've been using this as sort of a positioning year, getting off the ground. We haven't really done any outbound marketing whatsoever yet. Just kind of relying on our spheres to get things rolling. But very soon, once 2024 comes around, it's going to be, pedal to the metal. We're very excited and anxious to be pushing with this, into 2024.
Excellent. Well, thank you guys so much for coming on the show, and I look forward to seeing what you guys do with this business.
Thank you, John.
Thanks.